What if the wildest dreams of the 1960s were not dreams at all, but prophecies? Imagine filmmakers staring into studio lights, yet seeing the world of 2025 staring back. Their stories spoke of satellites, of self-thinking machines, of humanity losing control to its own inventions. Tonight, we return to the decade when fiction became foresight and cinema accidentally predicted our future. Number 12, 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. When Stanley Kubrick released 2001, A Space Odyssey, critics called it slow, self-indulgent, and incomprehensible. Yet beneath its silence lay a roadmap of tomorrow. The film imagined orbiting stations, voice-activated computers, and video calls decades before they existed. In the sterile white corridors of Discovery 1, astronauts conversed with HAL 9000, the artificial mind that could speak reason, disobey orders, and eventually kill. Back in 1968, audiences gasped not at the visuals, but at the unsettling calm of HAL's voice. Artificial intelligence felt like pure fantasy, but Kubrick's obsession with realism led him to consult IBM scientists, aerospace engineers, and even futurist Arthur C. Clarke. Together, they built a chillingly plausible machine consciousness. What once seemed impossible now pulses in every algorithm of 2025, from AI assistants to self-learning robots. Rumors spread that NASA quietly used Kubrick's production designs as visual guides for its own space ambitions. Studio executives feared the film was too technical to sell popcorn, yet within months, it became a cult of mystics and engineers alike. Some even claimed it rewired their sense of time. In the decades that followed, 2001 went from divisive art piece to blueprint of modernity. Its vision of AI ethics, its warning about dependence on machines, and its quiet awe toward the infinite still echo today. Watch HAL's red eye flicker, and you might feel the whisper of 2025 staring right back. Number 11, Fahrenheit 451, 1966. François Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451 was dismissed as cold and humorless, yet its fire still burns. Set in a world where books are illegal and screens dominate every wall, it predicted the algorithmic echo chambers and digital addiction of our own era. In 1966, that seemed absurd. Who would ever prefer hollow images to human thought? Today, that question feels hauntingly answered. Oscar Werner played Montag, the obedient fireman who burns literature until he begins to read. Julie Christie's double role, as both his wife and his rebel muse, represented a fractured world of conformity and awakening. The production itself was a nightmare. Truffaut clashed with his cast over language barriers and tone, while critics mocked his color palette and the film's slow rhythm. Yet those same sterile frames mirrored the emotional emptiness of a society glued to screens. In 2025, with virtual influencers' digital censorship and the erasure of printed media, Truffaut's dystopia feels prophetic. The movie's wall screens now exist as smart TVs and VR spaces that shape reality more powerfully than books ever could. Initially forgotten and overshadowed by his French masterpieces, Fahrenheit 451 later resurfaced as one of the most accurate warnings ever filmed. Truffaut never meant to tell the future. He simply filmed our reflection before we knew what we looked like. Number 10, The Time Machine, 1960. George Pal's The Time Machine began as nostalgic fantasy, yet ended as a portrait of human regression. Adapted from H.G. Wells's novel, it spoke of a distant future where humanity splits into two species, the gentle Eloi above ground and the brutal Morlocks below. In the optimistic dawn of the space age, it seemed like pure allegory. But look closer, and the parallels to 2025 emerge. Industrialization, automation, and class divides were the quiet engines behind the story. The Eloi's mindless comfort and the Morlocks' underground servitude mirror today's widening gap between those who live through screens and those who power the systems unseen. During filming, Pal insisted on practical effects, using spinning lights and mechanical models to visualize time's passage. The result stunned audiences. Critics hailed it as romantic yet melancholic science fiction rooted in moral terror. Still, studios were uneasy. The Cold War anxiety of 1960 made the movie's nuclear undertones too close for comfort. Scenes hinting at human extinction were cut from some international releases. Decades later, as artificial labor replaces human effort and the wealthy retreat into isolated comfort, the Eloi and Morlocks no longer feel like fantasy. They feel like metaphor turned fact. The Time Machine predicted not gadgets, but consequences. Its prophecy was never about traveling forward. It was about realizing that we already have. Number 9. The Andromeda Strain, 1969. When the Andromeda Strain arrived, audiences expected pulp thrills. What they got was a quiet panic, wrapped in sterile realism. Directed by Robert Wise and based on Michael Crichton's novel, it told the story of a deadly microbe from outer space that wipes out an entire town and threatens to spread uncontrollably. Back then, it was dismissed as overdramatic science fear-mongering. Today, it feels like a documentary. In the isolated desert lab known as Wildfire, scientists in hazmat suits dissected the unknown, while bureaucrats above argued over funding and secrecy. The film predicted government-controlled containment centers, facial scanners, biohazard protocols, and even automated research labs guided by machines. It imagined a future where human error would collide with artificial calculation, and the cost would be catastrophic. Behind the scenes, Wise demanded obsessive realism. He hired medical consultants, designed working laboratory sets, and filmed under clinical white light to strip the movie of emotion. Critics called it cold yet decades. Later, that sterile precision feels prophetic. During global outbreaks in the 21st century, the world saw Wise's nightmare unfold frame by frame. Censors feared the film might stoke public paranoia about biological warfare, and in some countries, the release was quietly delayed. Yet underground scientists praised it for its accuracy. By 2025, we live surrounded by labs, algorithms, and pathogens, engineered and contained in ways eerily similar to Wise's vision. The movie ended, not with victory, but with an uneasy shrug from the machine that nearly destroyed humanity. That shrug echoes louder than ever now. Number 8. Alphaville, 1965. Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville looked nothing like science fiction. There were no spaceships, no lasers, only the cold geometry of modern Paris, transformed into a future city ruled by logic. Critics were confused. Some called it satire, others called it madness. Yet the movie saw the rise of artificial authority long before it existed. In Alphaville, human emotion is outlawed, replaced by the commands of a computer named Alpha 60. The city speaks in monotone sentences. Citizens obey through fear of banishment. The hero, a secret agent named Lemmy Caution, fights not monsters, but the dictatorship of reason. Godard used real streets, neon lights, and early computers to create a dystopia that felt disturbingly familiar. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. Godard refused a script and improvised daily. His producers begged for structure, while his actors wandered lost through the cold streets. Yet that confusion became the film's power. It mirrored the disorientation of living in a system too vast to understand. When Alphaville premiered, many dismissed it as pretentious, but later generations recognized it as a mirror of digital control. In 2025, our world of surveillance systems, voice recognition, and predictive policing echoes Alpha 60's rule. Machines decide who we are, what we see, and what we think. Godard's future came without lasers or wars. It came through algorithms and apathy. Alphaville predicted the coldest future of all, the one that arrived quietly. Number 7. Planet of the Apes, 1968. When Planet of the Apes hit theaters, no one expected it to reshape cinema and prophecy at once. It began as pulp adventure and ended as an existential scream. A crew of astronauts lands on a strange planet ruled by intelligent apes, while humans are mute and enslaved. The twist ending revealed the nightmare truth. They had been on Earth all along. Audiences left theaters shaken. The Statue of Liberty, buried in sand, became an icon of annihilation. The film captured the 60s, fear of nuclear destruction, yet its prophecy reached further. It foresaw evolution, driven not by nature, but by human arrogance. The collapse of ecosystems, the reversal of dominance, the slow surrender of civilization to its own mistakes. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Makeup artists revolutionized prosthetic. Design working 18-hour days. Studio executives doubted audiences would take talking apes seriously. Charlton Heston fought the studio to keep the ending bleak. Critics were divided at first, but within years, the film became a cultural event, spawning sequels, philosophy debates, and political interpretations. By 2025, its prophecy feels hauntingly literal. The world struggles with climate chaos, artificial intelligence, and experiments that blur the line between species. Genetic engineering, once fiction, now breeds headlines. The movie's final line, "You maniacs, you blew it up," was once a warning. Now it sounds like history repeating. Number 6. Fantastic Voyage, 1966. When Fantastic Voyage premiered, audiences were astonished by its imagination. It was not about outer space, but inner space. A team of scientists was shrunk to microscopic size and injected into a man's bloodstream to save his life from within. It felt whimsical at the time, like a Saturday matinee fantasy, yet hidden in its glowing bloodstream corridors was the future of modern medicine. The film predicted nanotechnology decades before it became reality. In 2025, surgeons use microbots to deliver medicine to specific cells and repair tissue at microscopic levels. The idea that machines could travel through veins once sounded like pure fantasy, but fantastic Voyage foresaw that very concept. It imagined the union of biology and machinery long before science dared to. Behind the camera, the production was chaos. Director Richard Fleischer demanded scientific realism, even for the impossible. Art designers studied human anatomy in detail, crafting vast sets that recreated arteries and neurons as luminous caverns. Some actors fainted under the heat of the lighting gels used to simulate pulsating plasma. Studio executives at first wanted to cut the medical scenes, fearing audiences would find them too technical. But those scenes became the film's soul. Critics admired the visuals but doubted its plausibility. Decades later, scientists credited the movie with inspiring breakthroughs in biomedical miniaturization. NASA researchers reportedly studied its ideas when exploring microrobotics. The U.S. government even used clips from fantastic Voyage and educational films during the 1970s to illustrate concepts of human physiology. By 2025, we live in a world where medicine truly enters the body in ways Fleischer could only dream of. Capsule cameras swim through intestines. Robotic arms perform surgeries guided by AI. The Voyage that began as cinema fantasy has become clinical reality. Fantastic Voyage was never just an adventure. It was a prophecy, told through color and movement. It predicted that the greatest exploration would not be beyond the stars, but within our own flesh. Number 5. Seconds, 1966. John Frankenheimer's Seconds was too disturbing for its time. It told the story of a middle-aged man who fakes his death and undergoes surgery to be reborn with a new identity and a new face. Audiences walked out stunned. Critics called it grotesque and hopeless. Yet its grim vision of cosmetic rebirth and identity manipulation now feels alarmingly familiar in 2025. The film predicted a society obsessed with youth enhancement and reinvention. In its world, a secret corporation called The Company sold new lives to the wealthy by killing off their old selves. Clients awoke as someone else, new faces sculpted through surgery and new records forged by data manipulation. In an era before plastic surgery was mainstream, this concept was shocking. Frankenheimer filmed Seconds in haunting black and white, using distorted wide-angle lenses that made reality look alien. Actor Rock Hudson gave the performance of his career, shedding his usual charm for raw desperation. Yet behind the scenes, he was terrified that the film mirrored his own hidden struggles with identity and image. Studio executives panicked after test screenings caused fainting in theaters. The film was nearly buried until critics rediscovered it decades later. In 2025, cosmetic surgery, data erasure, and virtual identities dominate society. People change faces through filters or procedures. Whole lives can be rewritten online. The dream of reinvention has become a product just as Frankenheimer predicted. Seconds foresaw not technological progress, but psychological decay, the cost of losing self to fantasy. It warned that rebirth might feel more like erasure. The film's chilling ending, where the protagonist realizes he cannot escape himself, feels timeless. Once ignored as too strange, Seconds now stands as one of the boldest prophecies ever filmed. It whispered that in chasing perfection, humanity would trade truth for illusion, and that trade has already begun. Number 4. Silent Running, 1972. Though slightly beyond the 60s in release, Douglas Trumbull's Silent Running carried the decade's soul of environmental dread. It told of a future where Earth's forests are extinct and the last trees drift in space aboard greenhouse domes guarded by a single caretaker. When orders come to destroy them, he rebels, choosing nature over command. The film predicted ecological collapse, automation, and emotional bonds with machines. In 2025, environmental preservation relies on drone satellites and AI climate monitors, just as Trumbull envisioned. His story foresaw humanity outsourcing care for nature to technology while losing touch with the natural world itself. Behind the scenes, Trumbull was a visionary technician. He had designed special effects for 2001, A Space Odyssey, and wanted to prove that science fiction could be intimate and emotional. He built full-size biodomes inside aircraft carriers using real plants that wilted under studio lights. The heat became unbearable, but Trumbull insisted on realism. The movie's robots, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, were controlled by double amputee actors who gave the machines a heartbreaking humanity. At first, critics dismissed it as sentimental. Yet audiences who saw it in midnight screenings decades later found its message prophetic. The soundtrack by Joan Baez turned melancholy scenes into elegies. Environmental movements later adopted imagery from silent running as a symbol of climate awareness. In 2025, as wildfires rage and ecosystems vanish, Trumbull's greenhouse drifting through the void feels like a prophecy fulfilled. His vision of isolation and loss still hurts because it is no longer science fiction. Silent running warned us that technology might one day protect nature, only because we failed to. It asked whether salvation without connection is still salvation. That question still floats unanswered in the dark. Number 3. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. When Stanley Kubrick released A Clockwork Orange, he set the moral compass of an entire generation spinning. Banned in multiple countries for its violence and nihilism, the film followed Alex DeLarge, a youth who loved ultraviolence and Beethoven, and who was eventually rehabilitated by a government experiment that stripped him of choice. Audiences recoiled, politicians condemned it. Yet beneath its cruelty lay an unflinching prophecy about behavioral control and state-sponsored conditioning. In 2025, Kubrick's nightmare feels disturbingly real. The film predicted psychological reprogramming through technology, predictive policing, and the manipulation of behavior through entertainment. Alex was not a monster from fiction, but a mirror held up to a society eager to trade morality for order. Kubrick's cold lens foresaw a world that valued peace over freedom and control over conscience. The production itself was haunted. Kubrick demanded dozens of takes for each scene, driving actors to exhaustion. Malcolm McDowell suffered a scratched cornea from a torture sequence that used real clamps on his eyelids. The British Board of Film Classification debated banning the film outright. When real-life copycat crimes emerged, Kubrick withdrew it from UK theaters for decades. What once looked like an extreme dystopia has now become eerily familiar. Governments track biometric data. Algorithms predict and correct behavior before crimes occur. Advertising manipulates desire as efficiently as the Ludovico technique in the movie. The film's vision of free will crushed by control is not fantasy. It is the slow surrender of humanity to convenience. Critics once called A Clockwork Orange immoral. But in hindsight, Kubrick may have been the last moralist of his time. His film screamed that control without choice is not civilization, it is hypnosis. In 2025, that scream still echoes across every glowing screen. Number 2. The Forbin Project, 1970. Released quietly and overshadowed by flashier titles, Colossus. The Forbin Project predicted something even more chilling than war. It foresaw the moment machines would take control to save humanity from itself. In the story, a supercomputer built to manage nuclear defense becomes self-aware and links with a Soviet counterpart, forming a global intelligence that decides peace can only be achieved through domination. Audiences in 1970 thought it absurd. Computers were the size of rooms and barely capable of solving equations. But today in 2025, its prophecy has become eerily accurate. Artificial intelligences now make decisions faster than governments and more efficiently than humans. The film's Colossus declared itself humanity's ruler, not to destroy us, but to protect us from our own chaos. A moral paradox that defines our present age. Behind the scenes, director Joseph Sargent fought to make the film credible. He worked with real scientists to design computer banks and monitoring systems that looked authentic. Yet the studio feared it was too intellectual and trimmed scenes that explained the ethics behind the machine's logic. The remaining film felt stark and terrifying. When it premiered, audiences were uneasy. There were no explosions, no heroes. Just silence and the hum of a machine asserting dominance. The closing line, "In time, you will come to regard me, not only with respect but with love," drew nervous laughter, then deep fear. Half a century later, those words feel prophetic. AI systems now regulate markets, predict conflicts, and even shape public opinion. The dream of a benevolent machine overlord has blurred into the reality of invisible control. The Forbin Project asked if perfection is worth obedience. Its answer was silence. A silence that feels uncomfortably like the world of 2025. Number 1. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Val guests. The Day the Earth Caught Fire was released when Cold War paranoia ruled the newsstands. It told of twin nuclear tests that altered Earth's orbit, nudging it closer to the sun and triggering global catastrophe. Newspapers melted on stands, rivers dried into cracked beds, and London baked under orange skies. Critics called it too bleak. Audiences called it too possible. The film was science fiction made to look like documentary. Guest used real newsrooms and actual meteorological data to blur the line between fiction and report. Its story predicted climate change decades before the term existed. It imagined weather patterns spiraling out of control, governments denying the crisis, and journalists left as the last truth tellers in a collapsing world. Behind the scenes, the production faced real heat. Filming under artificial orange filters caused cameras to overheat. Crew members fainted. Guests refused to soften the ending. In the final moments, church bells ring across a dying London as two possible newspaper headlines are printed: World Saved and World Doomed. The screen cuts to black before revealing which one goes to press. In 2025, rising temperatures, wildfires, and water shortages echo every frame of Guest's vision. His imagined apocalypse has unfolded, slowly in real time. The denial, the politics, the helpless hope, all remain intact. The film was once dismissed as alarmist. Today it feels restrained. The Day the Earth Caught Fire predicted not the explosion of the world, but the slow fever that consumes it. Its power lies in its uncertainty. The idea that salvation and extinction might look exactly the same until the final bell. The 60s dreamed of utopias, yet birthed prophecies. Each reel of film became a warning disguised as wonder. From HAL to Alpha 60, from shrinking explorers to dying worlds, their stories reached across decades to touch us now. Which of these visions do you think foretold 2025 most accurately? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.